In the previous video, I moved some of the components around, get them closer to where they needed to be. So now I'm going to constrain these components in this assembly. So I'll go into my Assemblies tab, go into Assembly Constraints. Now you need a component that is fixed, first thing. And when we brought in that housing, it was the first component we brought in. The system asked us, do we want to fix this? And it did create that fixed constraint for us. You can see there it is. If I try to apply it again, I did here, it's just going to say, hey, do you want to do this? Do you really want to do another one? We really don't. So we're just going to hit no. But if the case were you needed a fix, you wouldn't get any messages. You would just hit the fix, hit the component, hit apply. Got it. Next thing I want to do is I want to start moving or apply my constraints to my components. Now, the first component I want to constrain is my stem. So I want to clean up the screen a little bit. Remember, I've talked about this before. Red check marks always denote visibility. So if I come over here and turn off my arm, you'll see red check mark's gone. The arm is now hidden. I also want to turn off the cover and begin constraining this. So I'm just going to go over to touch align. We'll probably use touch align 80-90% of the time. Almost all of our constraints can be had from touch align unless you're doing like distances, that type of thing, or angles, relationships, kind of like sketcher constraints, perpendicular, that type of stuff. So here, touch align, we're going to use prefer touch. And, there's several of them. And this one basically is like an inferred. It's all of these combined. So we'll just leave preferred touch and now pick my two objects. I'm going to zoom in. I want to constrain my stem and be very cautious in what you pick. You don't want to pick the face. You want to pick the axis. Okay, if I pick a face, it's going to make the faces touch. I want to pick the axis to make this axis and the axis off of my housing touch. Okay, so be very cautious with that. Next, I want to take this face to this face and make them touch. I'm going to select OK. Just to show you, I'm going to go into the Constraint Navigator. This is how we view what's been constrained and how it's constrained. You can see that the housing is fixed. And then below that is the valve stem, and it's a partial constraint. If this were fully black as a dot, you would see that point, a full circle. That means it is fully constrained. This is just partially. I know it's partially constrained. We can still spin this inside of the housing. So I don't have that constraint yet. We'll apply that later. So I'm going to go back into my Assembly Navigator. Next thing I want to add is the cover. I want to constrain that cover. I'll just go into Assembly Constraints. Same, leave it on Prefer Touch. Again, axis to axis. Very important, people. Then again, axis to axis. Be very, very careful. If it's dancing around on you, sometimes you got to zoom way up to get it, which is fine. There we go. You'll notice that order here is not necessarily important. Because the housing is fixed, you can pick two from, doesn't really matter. That one, and then this face to this face. Select OK. I'm going to go back into my Constraint Navigator to show you there's that little fully constrained black dot that I was talking about. So if something's fully constrained, it's going to show up like this, and you have nothing left to do with it. So I'll just go back into my Assembly Navigator. Here I'm going to constrain my plate to the stem. So just go into Assembly Constraints. Again, axis to axis. Now, this is one of those conditions of, well, it kind of did something. I can't really pick that point, that one that I need. So I'll just hit OK. I'll just go into Move Component, pick this. And then now, if I try to move it, you'll notice that it won't go anywhere unless I do a rotation. The reason why it won't go anywhere is because it's constrained. So if I rotate it, well, it knows that it can rotate because that is axis to axis. Select OK, go back into Assembly Constraints, and once again, pick my center axis. Whoops, let me make sure I get my axis here. Got that. To my axis, got that. And then I want to take this face to this face. Select OK. Apply my constraints. Just check your Constraint Navigator one more time just to show you. You can see this one still needs an additional constraint. And again, because it's constrained to the stem, it's still free to move. It's still free to rotate. So you get that partial constraint. So that's the basics of bringing in your components and constraining them. Now you can see all of the constraints here in the window. So if I go back up to my assembly navigator and I right mouse click on the constraints node right over here, I can just turn off this little check mark to sort of clean up the screen. Just visualization purposes. They're still there, but they're just now hidden away.